This is a little bit less. Maybe it's also not the best material to showcase this. The phaser kind of is more, maybe makes more sense if you have like a pad or like a standing chord. This is where I would maybe use more a phaser, because it almost works similar to the notch filter I showed you earlier. It kind of takes a piece of the frequency spectrum out, and then this is kind of modulating around a specific frequency. So this is maybe not the best source material, but if you have, let's say, a string sound or something and you send it to a phaser, you will notice that it sounds similar to the notch filter. And again, it's always good to have like a dry-wet balance between these to get the most out. So these are really the three main pitch-based effects you will encounter: chorus, flanger, and phaser. And again, you would use them more for sounds that are more legato. Let's say classic way to use chorus is on a guitar or on an electric piano, or yeah, in reggae you often have the flanger and the phaser on the hi-hats. You know, the King Tubby style, they have a very heavy phasing on the percussion as well, but that's, I think, very specific. And yeah, in general, I think you will look for sounds that stand longer and that have more frequencies to kind of modulate, right? If you have a very kind of short sound, like a drum, like a snare drum, it won't make such a big difference. Let's move on to the next section, which is timbre-based effects. And these are the ones I picked out are the auto filter, the overdrive, and the redux. These three. And let me quickly show you how they sound. So, first one would be the auto filter. Maybe we use the drums for this as a source material. And similar to the filter that we saw on the synthesizer earlier, it works exactly the same way. Here's the filter frequency. You can make it more dull. Here's the resonance. You can use another filter type, high-pass filter, for instance. I think this visualization also shows you nicely. Low-pass filter, that's the low-frequency pass. High-pass filter, that's the high-frequencies pass. Band pass, let's only in between the low and the high-frequency a section through. And this is the notch. This is what I said earlier. The phaser reminds a little bit. Right, so this is the auto filter. It's called auto filter because you don't have to do this manually all the time. Instead, you can also assign something similar. You know, before we learned about the envelope, here we have the so-called LFO. LFO is a low frequency oscillator. It basically is, you know, an oscillator is the sound generator in a synthesizer, but this one right here, the frequency it oscillates at is so low that we can't hear it. But instead, what we can use it for is we can use it to modulate parameters. So for instance, here, what I'm doing now manually with the frequency, I can also let the LFO do this. So if I hit start now, here I control the speed of the oscillator. And here how much it should move left to right. Right, so it's doing just the same as if I would do this manually, but if I say amount, how much do I want this to move left and right, and here how fast. So this is why it's called auto filter, because it has this automatic modulation of the filter frequency. Next one would be the overdrive. And keep in mind, we're talking about timbre-based effects. So this also changes the timbre of the sound. If I change the dry wet to 100% dry, also 0% wet, this is just the normal drums. But if I now increase this, you see the sound gets more aggressive and harsher and shriller, and I can even increase this by having more drive. Right? All of a sudden we have more overtones. So if you remember what I showed you in the synthesizer when we were using the sine wave and we were using the sawtooth wave, and you remember the sawtooth had more overtones and the sine wave was more rounder, you can also artificially generate overtones with the drive. Right? All of a sudden you have this very harsh sound that was not there before, which is what the overdrive can be used. Often, you know, it is associated with overdriving guitars and distorting guitars, but this is also a very good sound design tool to, you know, just kind of, if I add a little bit of the effect, just 10%. All of a sudden the sound gets much more brighter, you know, so this is what I like to use it for. And then the last one of the timbre-based effects is the bit reduction. And bit reduction is actually something where you are emulating shortcomings of older digital audio gear where they didn't have the high resolution that we have these days. You know, we have 24 bits or 32 bits even. Back in the day, you had much less resolution, and through this, the sound that was coming out of a sampler, for instance, was much harsher. Take, for instance, I'm sure you all know these greeting cards that you open up and then somebody sings happy birthday to you, right? You have these little chips built in, and that is like super low resolution. That's 8-bit or even less. So this is what you can emulate here. So let's take a listen. So here I choose how many bits, let's say 8 bits. So you have to turn it on, of course. 16 bits. Basically, it can't reproduce accurately what we put in, and then this kind of mangled sound that comes out is actually really interesting. I'm going to show you how it sounds like on the bass. You know, the bass almost has no overtones, for instance. If we distort it, you actually can hear it much better. And bit reduction gives completely different character to the sound. All right, it's very interesting because it creates these artifacts that just allow you to also have a different color to the sound. So these were the timbre-based effects. Next one would be volume-based effects. And there we have the three main candidates are the auto pan, the compressor, and the limiter. And let me show you what they do.
Wait, did you just say what it was also the overdrive and?
Redux is the last one. I can show you in the list.
The last one?
Yeah, it's Redux, R-E-D-U-X. And this is kind of, it's a bit reduction. You can also see it in the subtitle here, and it's called Redux in the Ableton browser.
Okay.
You got it? Okay, so the next three are auto pan, compressor, and limiter. So let me quickly show you how these work. Let's maybe switch back to the sounds here again. The this part. And now when I activate the auto pan, it basically allows me to automatically change the volume in the left or on the right channel. Now, you all wear headphones, so you will notice what's going on. I think you will hear that it's basically, at some point you will only hear it on the left ear and another time only on the right ear. Also make it really fast. This is the amount, how much it should kind of change the volume between these two. And you can also see it here in the Ableton. Take a look at the volume meter here. Right now you can see sometimes the left volume goes up, sometimes it goes down. So this is exactly what the auto pan is doing. It allows you to have allocate the sound to the left or the right channel. And interestingly enough, again, we are having to deal with an LFO here. This automatic change of volume is being controlled by an LFO where you select the speed, the rate. So from here you can see 0.5 hertz. This is basically how many times the oscillation takes place. And then here you can change the characteristic. You can say, I want to have a sawtooth, I want to have a triangle, or I want to have noise. Right? Noise is something that is not predictable, so it gives you quasi-random effects. And you can also, what's quite interesting is change the phase. So if you change the phase to 0, you have what's more like what's called a tremolo. It changes the volume on both channels at the same time. See? Right. So, for instance, this way now I'm able to change the overall volume of the sound continuously. I can also do it really fast. It's also a really cool effect, I think. One thing also to mention is this is currently free running. When I set it to hertz, I can dial in exactly how many hertz I want this frequency to be, or I can synchronize it to the song tempo. So right now I have 140 BPM. And now I can select what note value. Right now I have, for instance, 8 notes, quarter notes. So this allows me to make this change in volume happen in time with the song. So this is very, very helpful, I think, to have the possibility to set it to the song tempo here. The next effect, volume-based effect, which is really difficult to understand. So a lot of musicians, even in the last part of their career, have difficulty to explaining what it does. But I think it's often being overcomplicated. So what the compressor actually is doing, it's nothing more than a volume control that is automated based on the signal that goes in. So you have to imagine inside the compressor, there's like a circuit that listens to the sound that comes in. And you basically tell the circuit, if the sound goes over a threshold of, let's say, minus 12 dB, once it goes over here, I want you to reduce the volume that comes out, right? I want you to make sure when it gets louder than this, reduce the volume by this amount. 2 to 1, for instance. 1 to 1 means if it goes over this, it reduces it by nothing, right? So the sound that comes out is the same that goes in. But if you say 2 to 1, it basically reduces the volume. The higher you go, you have infinite. You know, this is maybe a bad example, but let's say you have 4. So then 4 to 1 means for every dB of volume that it goes over. So for this is basically the volume in dB that gets reduced that exceeds the threshold. So again, it sounds very complicated, but let's make a concrete example. Let's listen to the drums through the compressor. First of all, you will see when it crosses the threshold, you will have this little meter in the middle start to react. And this is the gain reduction. This means basically that the sound that comes in gets reduced in volume. See, when I move it further down, also the gain reduction reacts harder. And one thing you might notice from listening to it is the clap comes out stronger, and also the kick gets more body. Let's listen in comparison. Without. Right, it starts to sound more aggressive and more upfront. It's because it takes specific phases of the sound. You know, when the clap is heard, the initial sensation of the clap, you know, is very short. This is what we perceive, and then it dies out very quickly. So what the compressor actually does, you know, this short burst of energy of the clap goes over the threshold. So straight away the compressor knows, oh, hold on, I have to turn this down. It reduces the sound of this initial impulse, and then afterwards, once it goes under the threshold, the volume goes up again. So as a result, you're leveling out the sound in terms of the overall volume. You don't have this sharp spike at the beginning and then a very quiet part afterwards, but the compressor helps you to have more of an even volume to each of the sounds in the drums, for instance, that you hear here. Let me just kind of change the settings, and then I think you will also hear what it does. I think the clap is a really good example to listen to. See, this is a graphical representation. Here you see the waveform of the drums, and here you see when the drums go over the threshold, the volume is lowered. See, now at the moment we're only taking the very top of the sound. So this is obviously today we don't have really time to go into detail, but this is, I think, what you should remember when you think about the compressor. It's an automatic volume control that is changing the volume very quickly based on the signal that goes into the circuit, and this helps you to maximize the volume in your drums. So if you want to produce like club music, this is really important to master the compressor and to get a very hot sound in the drums. Hot sound meaning not a lot of dynamics, not a lot of quiet and a lot of loud sounds, but everything being pretty much loud overall. This is the kind of music that you hear in the radio, that you hear in the club. You know, this always has a very, very highly compressed drums. And the second, or the last of our dynamic or volume-based effects, but that also works often closely with the compressor, is the limiter. And the limiter is basically a compressor with a ratio of infinite, which means at the moment when the volume exceeds our threshold, you know, the volume that we say we don't want this to be louder than that, the volume gets reduced. So you still have an overshoot, it still goes over the threshold. But what the limiter does, it basically just cuts it off completely. It's called often a brick wall limiter. You know, it's like you're riding with 120 on the street, and then boom, you hit into a brick wall, and the car just gets smashed. This is the kind of image you have to keep in mind when you're dealing with a limiter. Now check this out. You see, we have also the meter peaking here, but when it goes over, it actually just completely cuts off the spikes that exceed this volume. And this is why the limiter is really important. If you mix down your track in the end, you want to have a volume that goes up until 0 dB, but not over, right? You don't want it to distort. Now check this out here. You see it exactly peaks at -12 dB. I set the master volume to -12. You see what's happening if I raise it up? it only goes up to 12, never over 12. So this is a really good tool to get your music loud, but it can also change the quality of your music and can make it sound very harsh and unpleasant. So you have to kind of use this with caution. But often the combination compressor and limiter together get you really good loud sounding drums. If you want to make beat-based music, I would really suggest you look at these two and learn what each of the dials does, especially by running a drums through it and then listening to the changes that, you know, as I said, when the volume changes here or the volume changes there, you know, how does it affect the quality of your sound? This is really important, I think. The last category are time-based effects, and the two main effects here are delay and reverb. Let me quickly show you. They are quite fancy to look at, and essentially they are dealing with time in two different ways. So the delay, what it does, let's see what I put in here. Right, so what happens here at the moment is, this is the dry signal. And now if I add the delay signal to it, what it does, it repeats the sound that comes in. And we can basically say how long between the original sound and the repetition. For instance, right now here, you can see I have this synchronized to the song tempo. And here basically, each of these gives me the 16th notes, amount of 16th notes between the sound and the repetition. So listen to this, to the clap, and listen to when the repeated clap comes in. All right, so now we have a 16th note. You notice another parameter here is the feedback. And this basically determines how many repetitions of the clap you will hear. Listen again. Now you only have exactly one repetition, right? It comes one clap. Did it? This original? And now listen while I change the amount of delay time. You will notice that the distance between these two claps gets longer. Right, so this is important for you to understand. With this here, you tell the delay effect how many 16th notes you want to have between the original sound and the repetition, and here you tell them how many repetitions do you want. Right? This is kind of, I think, a very easy to understand effect, and it gives you a lot of flexibility to make your sound kind of more complex, because you can see with the very simple pattern, just by setting the delay to 3/16 and adding a bit of feedback, all of a sudden, very straight. It's much more funky this way. And quite interesting is also you have a filter for the delay signal only. So this way you can differentiate the effect signal more from the original signal. So check this out. What I'm doing right now is I'm basically making this and turning this into a bandpass filter, and I only want to hear this upper mid kind of portion of the delayed signal. Right now, all of a sudden, it becomes even more spacey this way, because it doesn't just sound like the same sound is being repeated, but instead you will have this character of the delay going through the filter that kind of gives it a little bit more depth. Right, so this is the delay. Let's look at the reverb. Reverb is not a repetition.
Jan?
Sure. Yes.
Sorry for cutting you short again.
No.
What does in the delay? What does left and right signify? What does that stand for?
Good question. So at the moment with this icon I have here, it basically means that they are both linked. So when I set here, doesn't matter which of the two, the volume of the other one will follow. Now, if you detach them, you basically have the possibility to have different values on the left and on the right speaker, so to speak, or
Okay.
the side of the channel. So listen to this. On the left-hand side now we have 3 16th notes. On the right side we have 4 16th notes.
Okay.
Super bassy, right?
Yeah.
So you have like kind of like almost like a panning and a filter delay at the same time. So you can experiment and get some really interesting effects going with that.
Okay. Thank you. I understand.
No problem. So let's look at the reverb. Reverb is more like what you experience in everyday life. Like if you walk through a hallway and you speak, and you will notice that the voice of your sound is kind of reflected from the walls and gives you the feeling of a physical space. And this is what the reverb does. So again, let's turn it down to 0%, so we hear the dry signal. And now you get the feeling as if the drums were placed into a large room. Right? And this is basically, you can easily manipulate this by using the decay time. Right? The longer the decay time, the larger the virtual room. Another parameter you often see in reverb effects is the pre-delay. This is basically the time between the sound and the reverb signal coming back. So listen to this. You hear it's basically, you hear the clap and then 200 milliseconds pass, and only then you will hear the reverb. So this is kind of like now a gray area. It's almost like a little bit like a delay. You know, we create a delay between the original sound and the effect sound, but it doesn't just repeat the original sound. Instead, in the reverb, you get this reflected quality of the sound that gives you the feeling like it's standing in a room. But using the pre-delay, you can kind of avoid a situation where the original sound and the reverb sound overlay each other, and it becomes a little bit kind of, how can I say, it's just not so transparent in the mix in the end, maybe. So you might want to always add a little bit of pre-delay when you're adding a reverb to your drums, for instance, or your voice. All right. So this is kind of, there's a lot of more controls in there, but I think if you just understand that, you know, blending it is the first part, then setting the decay time and setting the pre-delay, this will already give you a lot of really good sounds, in my opinion, you know, and then you are able to also explore the other parameters when you have a more deep understanding how they interact. Cool, so these were basically all the different effects you can encounter. They might be called different names, and they might have some kind of combinations. There might be a filter together with a delay, or there might be a reverb with a flanger packaged into one. But at the end of the day, it always comes down to either of these types that we had to look at, right? It will either be pitch-based, timbre-based, volume-based, or time-based. So we're now getting to the end of our session together. So normally I was planning to give you a chance to experiment with the different effects types on the tracks that I provided, you know. So when you download the session, you will have all three tracks, the bass, the melodies, and the drums. But since we're a little bit short on time, I would say, please do this on your own, just experiment, and hopefully this will give you a good reference kind of to just listen to yourself how the different effects feel like, what they do to you, and how you like to use them maybe in your productions. We also have to skip the break and go straight to the mixing concepts. And this is kind of like more a philosophical approach, because there's not really like a wrong or right. This has something to do with taste. So you will have your own music and you will have your own style, and this means that also it's more about understanding the principles behind mixing, and instead of saying you need to set the volume for the bass to this and the snare to this makes no sense in my opinion. So I always like to quote this guy called Wolfgang Pauli, who said, no two things can occupy the same space. And this is the same is true for mixing music. You know, if you have two elements in the mix that fight over the same space or over the same kind of positioning in the mix, you will not get a transparent or clear mix. They will always kind of cancel each other out, or they will you know, distort the sound or make it intransparent. So that's why I think this is a great way to think of when you're mixing. You need to find always a specific space in the mix for each of the sound where they live. So there's actually three main tools you want to use for this to separate elements in the mix. One is the equalizer, the other one is adjusting the volume, and the third one is setting the panning. And if you look at Ableton, obviously it's very convenient to set up your channels to have these ready. I mean, every channel that you create straight away has a volume fader and it has a panning control. So the third kind of tool you need to add is just within the audio effect section. You will use the EQ. I like to use EQ8. It's very flexible. And here basically you have different EQ bands. You see these right here. This is 2, 3, and 4. They are highlighted with this blue button underneath. So maybe I just load this quickly on one of the tracks I was showing you. Let's use the drums again as an example. And now if I set the if I would say this is one of the three tracks we're dealing with, we have the bass, we have the drums, and we have the sounds that kind of happen there. I would then have an equalizer on each of these tracks, and then I would try to figure out a way how to make these three tracks coexist and get the most impact out of them. So if I play this back now, you will see straight away you have different sounds. If I look at this, this looks like the kick drum. Here's kind of the body of the clap. And now what I can do is I can select a band, say this one here, and then I can, you see frequency 33 Hertz, and now with the gain, I can boost it. You see now all of a sudden the kick drum comes out stronger. I can change the Q factor, and what this does is basically it focuses how much of the surrounding frequencies I want to have included in the boost. So the sharpest is 18 dB. This gives like a super high focus. You basically hear individual kind of parts of the sound that you normally wouldn't notice, individual resonances. But for instance, now for something like this, I want to have like more of a musical kind of application. I would not use such a high Q factor and try to be more musical about which areas I boost, or maybe also cut. So let's say I want the clap to be quieter. I would do the same in inverse. I would also make this maybe a little bit sharper, more focused. Right, this allows you now to shape the sound, or the channel, or the drum loop, or whatever you have, or the voice, to take out some parts that you don't like and embellish parts that you like, but that you feel are not strong enough there. So one very popular thing to do, for instance, would be to make two elements kind of live together, which I always like to call solving conflict with the equalizer. So you identify sounds that are playing in a similar sound world at the same time, in a similar frequency spectrum, right? So let's take as an example our kick drum and the drums plus the bass line. Right, if I now if I compare the two, you will notice they occupy a lot of the same space. So for instance, here you see the root note of the bass is somewhere around 50 Hertz. And then we also notice the kick drum is quite low. It's around this area here. Kick drum I already set a little bit lower on purpose, but they share a similar sonic space. So it's now my question, which of them is more important in that regard, or how can I make them coexist? So one thing you can do, for instance, is you can say, why don't I just kind of use this filter here? It's a low pass filter, right? Sorry, a high pass filter. So it allows me to cut off a little bit of the low frequency. So now the kick drum is not as powerful, but you will notice all of a sudden you can hear the bass line more easily. All right, so this is one way to deal with that. Or as I said earlier, we noticed, we tried to figure out where does the clap live. Turn on this band, look for it. One trick that's really neat is if you activate this headphone button here and you click and hold on one of the frequency bands, check out what happens. I'm just going to mute solo drums. You see the waveform becomes blue. And now I only hear this particular spectrum of the sound. And now I can listen to that particular aspect of the drums that I want to maybe remove a little bit, that is kind of disturbing me. Right, here we have this psh aspect of the clap. Let's remove that. So we're talking about 1.9 kilohertz. And now what I can do is I can actually have the sound aspect here more active in that frequency range. Okay, let's listen what happens here. Right, so now I basically carved out in the drums an area of the frequency spectrum where this part is more prominent, where this sound is more important. So that's why I always like to say, you know, this is a great way to clean up the mix with the equalizer is by identifying similar sounds played at the same time and then cut the same frequency in one sound that you want to emphasize in the other. This is what I just showed you. And the other one would be is using the compressor as a tool to solve conflict. So for instance here I could say between drums and the bass, a very popular kind of technique is the so-called sidechain compressing. So what I do now here is I use the kick drum as a trigger to tell the compressor to turn down the volume of the bass. Right? This allows me then to have both playing at the same time. You know, earlier we used the equalizer to remove parts of the sound, but now we're just going to turn down the bass in terms of volume really quickly, like this, yeah? But only whenever the kick drum plays. This is what the compressor will help us now with. So I use the compressor, set it up after the bass. And now I will activate this part here, the sidechain part. And I will tell it where to get the input from. And we say we want the drums to be the kind of signal that tells this compressor when to turn it up or down. So I select drums. And now, when I change the gain, or alternatively, what I could also do is just change the threshold. Here you see basically now the movement of the drums. This is the amplitude of the drum channel. And now what happens is, if I even have a higher ratio, you hear the kick drum basically on the snare drum pushing the bass line away. Right? Without. This is another technique that helps you to separate two sounds that occupy the same space, this time not in terms of the timbre, not using the equalizer, but using the compressor, and to change the volume of one, as one sound becomes louder, to have the other sound get quieter, and do this in a dynamic fashion. So what I would ask you again, this is like the final assignment that you can do based on what you learned today, is create a mixdown based on these concepts. And you can either use the stems that you have in the project that I uploaded for you, or maybe you have your own project already that you work on. Try to keep that in mind and follow these directions where you say, okay, I'm going to really make a transparent mix that allows me to listen to all the sounds. Every sound that is played gets the maximum spotlight, and I try to, create the sound stage by adjusting the volume, adjusting the frequencies via the equalizer, so that they all occupy their own sonic space. So this is
question. Can
Sorry?
you have more than one effect on a track? Can you have more than one effect? You can load
Absolutely.
Sound effects. Can you have more than one sound effect on one track?
Yes, let me show you. For instance, now if I take the drums, I could put a compressor on here, and then I could put a dynamic tube. So you see they are stacked, and they always move from left to right. This is a signal flow. So first it goes into the compressor, then in the dynamic tube, then in the echo. So just, just need to scroll at some point, because, for instance, here when I had these stems, I grouped them already, but you can see you can have loads and loads of effect, and then you can easily get lost in there as well. There's this little tool here at the bottom that I would suggest to use in this case. But yeah, you can stack them as much as your computer allows.
Okay, thanks.
Cool. We have another question from Malkia. No, two questions.
Yes.
I don't know, Malkia, if you want to ask. It's a lot. Or should I read it for you?
Yeah, so I was wondering, just not to to avoid an overload of effects, is it recommended to use all the effects in all your tracks, or it just depends on the kind of sound you want to get out there? I also noticed that you are using this arrangement view for the audio effects, and then you switch to session view when you are doing the mixing elements. So I was wondering, is this your preference, or I can do the audio effects in the session view, or so those are my questions.
Sure. So first question, I would always say as little as possible, so the better the sound is from the beginning, then you don't need to, let's say, use compression or equalization, or pile up lots of effects until in the end maybe it's not really such a strong sound that has such a strong image. For instance, like using the analogy of cooking, like when I cook, I don't want to put salt and pepper and all the spices in there just to have them in there, but it's more like, okay, what does the dish really need? So that's how I like to always look at or listen to the sounds, like what's missing, and maybe then also in comparison to another sound, what this sound not have yet that could make it stand out compared to the other sound. So I would always encourage you to first of all record good sounds, or start with a very good sound from the beginning, and then just think, okay, what do I want to do to add a little bit of room, add a little bit of movement through a modulation effect or so on. And then I think you will have a much stronger mix as well if you have very strong material to start with. And for the second question, I personally like just to use the session view, because you have the longer faders, so then you have a better kind of perspective on the amplitude of the individual tracks. And I don't know if you've seen this, you can also adjust this even further. So this is something it took me a while to figure out. Like you can, if you move this up, you also have the dB scale, and you can also kind of have more horizontal view of the fader. So this way then I can quickly see where's it peaking, right? So I have this. I have the over. This shows me the peak value. If I click on it, it resets. So this is also kind of a nice reference for me to understand, like, okay, where's the maximum amplitude of that particular channel. So that's why I tend to go into the session view, but I use Ableton a lot like a tape machine. So I record my parts into here and then I arrange in these blocks. So I will often, what you see here, what I've done is I will just loop it up and then kind of drag it out like this. And that's why I tend to work more like in the tape machine way, you know, where I will always think of how the arrangement grows over time. So this is the most natural way for me to work. But there's also no right or wrong. So I think whatever feels good for you, if you feel more like you want to have these different patterns, and this gives you more of a kind of inspiration to create your beats and your compositions, then this is the right way for you to work.
Jan, I have a question.
Yes, sure.
So when arranging the one of the tracks I was trying to do earlier, I was putting effects. But then now when it comes that's in arrangement view. But now when it comes to, you know, let's say like it's a bass line and I want one part to be a lot louder and then another part to be a reverb. So when I put an effect, the whole track had like reverb. So it was crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Could you show me could you show us how to, you know, separate?
Good point. Actually, I overlooked this. This is actually a very important kind of way to use effects. So at the moment, what I did was I would put all the effects on a channel itself. So what happens is, you know, for instance, here the bass channel goes through the effect, and then it's kind of every signal that goes through this particular channel is running through the effect. And this is only actually making sense for effects like compression or distortion. But for instance, when we get to room effects, so you mentioned reverb, actually there's a different approach to take there. And this is the so-called return channels. So I'm going to quickly show you how to do this. You can right-click and then create a return channel. If you have this blank area here over the master fader, or here on the right, let me see where we can do it. Here you have it on the right side, I believe. There you go. In this blank area, again, return channel. And now what happens here is, let me do it again. So you will see when I add a return channel, all of a sudden here you will get a send. See that? And this is basically from this particular channel, how much of this sound should be sent to this channel here. So let's see, we have the drums. If I increase the volume here, you will see all of a sudden the meter starts to move. That means I'm sending this channel from the drums into the return. And this is why it makes a lot of sense to use a reverb on a return channel, because check this out. I add the reverb here. Now, very important, if you deal with a return channel, always set it to 100% wet. You don't want any of the original signal to be on the return channel because you're already hearing it, right? This is the original sound. But now, when I increase the amount of volume from this channel that is being sent to this return channel, you all of a sudden have the room effect here, but you can share it with more than one sound. Right? So you can basically have one return channel with, let's say, a reverb, and then you can have another one with a delay. And now you can also use them dynamically. You see what I've just been doing? I was just moving the send very quickly. Right? So this gives you a lot of dynamic movement in the mix without, I think, you know, because it's very easy if you just put one effect after the other and they're constantly on, it just gets a mess. So this way you can pinpoint specific kind of movements you want to create. And, you know, it's very easy also to automate this. So if I were to, for instance, now have the sound channel here, you know, if I'm entering the automation mode, I can select here, delay, for instance, and then it's very easy to just draw in. Let's make like a really short loop here with 4 bars, like so. Now check this out. I'm just going to take out the pencil tool, and I'm just going to put a couple of these in here. So this is basically the amount of volume that is being sent to the delay. And all of a sudden the whole thing starts to get a different groove and starts to sound much more alive. So I would really recommend to experiment with the return channels as well, to avoid having this constant drone of effects going, and especially with spatial effects, this makes a huge difference.
Yeah, and how do you open the, I don't know if it's on the right, the thing with the stems, bass, drums?
Okay, so this one here, you mean?
Yes.
This is a group track. So basically, you can create and also dissolve the group track. So right now, all I need to do is hit Shift Command G, and then you see these 3 channels are just on their own again. And if I hit Command G, I put them into a group. And the benefit now is that these 3 channels go through this group, and then whatever I put here in this group channel will affect all of them. So for instance, if I add a distortion, the wrong one, Overdrive. Right now I have all of them going through the Overdrive. It's not necessarily something I would want to do, but just to demonstrate. Bass, drums, and sound, these 3 audio tracks are now routed through this channel here. And when you click on this, it allows you also to structure your session view or your arrangement in general. I like to have, for instance, like all my drums, like kick, snare, hi-hats, and so on, inside groups. So this way I can quickly, just name it drums, boom, and it's out of the way. And this is also like a really neat trick. If you hit Alt and then this little arrow, you can kind of open and close all tracks in the arrangement. So I like to use a lot of shortcuts because I have I travel a lot, and I have like a 13-inch laptop, so I always need to constantly rearrange my interface. So I really would suggest you take a look at all the really cool shortcuts that you have in Ableton, because it really allows you to quickly kind of zoom through your arrangement, even if you don't have like a big screen, and it feels much more like an instrument that way.
Anyone else have a question?
I don't have a question. I was just gonna say that I think autopan is like the coolest thing. I'm gonna autopan all my tracks in life forever. It's gonna be like,
then that was already a good session for me. Then I've done my job.
Yeah, that was amazing. And thank you for asking that question, Labji. I think Malkia thanks you as well. I'd also had a problem with effects where to get an effect only on a certain part of the song, I had to record myself moving it, then moving it back. And I was like, how?
Right.
But now at least I've seen you drawing it out, and I'm just like, of course. Yeah. So
yes,
thank you.
Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Cool. So you guys have assignments? When will you be collecting the assignments from the students?
Well, I don't know how your schedule is, but I would say by the end of the week would be a good timing, right?
End of week, yeah, that would be perfect. I think it would also be timed with the showcase that we're going to try and put together, so you guys can be working throughout the week, practice, look through the video again. And David has shared all the bits that have made up this session that Jan has put together on a Google Drive, so you guys can download all the effects, all the sounds, play around with them, or create your own stuff during the week. And yeah.
Thank you so much, everybody. It was a great experience, and keep working hard, and hopefully you will also be able to find your very own sound.
Indeed. I don't think we... Huh? Yeah, someone is playing. Someone is going ham. Is it Malkia?
Oh my God. I'm sorry.
It's okay. It's fine.
left us. She was like, bye.
Exit.
Got the little
Ejects.
accordion melody going.
I just thought I make sure I don't forget nothing, so I'm starting right away.
Nice one. Yes, keep doing it.
Just to say that, yeah, the session is in. I've shared the Google Drive with the session in there. I just downloaded it myself, and it all opened up, and everything's there. So, yeah, definitely just dive in and play around with the effects. So, yeah, I just also wanted to say that I found it really useful as well, because I know it was quite technical, a lot of technical terminology to begin with. We're talking about actually like this sort of science behind sound, and but you know, this is also terminology that is required in music production, so it's good to get a grasp on that and understand a bit of the background. So it's pretty helpful for me as well. So
I thought it's good to scare everyone at first, and then start to get more enjoyable.
And I just want to say to Janice, and sorry that I didn't realize that analog was not in intro. Let's get you on a trial version for the next, which is for 3 months, and I'll make sure you get upgraded to a different license in the meantime. Good.
Thank you all.
Cool. Thank
and
you,
have a lot
everyone.
of fun for the rest of the course. I think it's a great opportunity, you know, for me also to see what you are doing, and best of luck. And if you have any question, you can find me. I have a homepage. You can also send me a mail if there's something you're not clear about. So don't be shy.
Great. Thank you so much, Jan.
My
Okay. Good night, everyone.
Good
Have
Good
good
night to
music
Nairobi.
making.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Bye, everyone.
Bye bye.